Hello, my name is Claudia Mesch and I teach at Arizona State University. My paper today is entitled Game-Based Learning in the Introductory Art History course, Weaving Historical Contexts and Incentivizing Critical Looking. This paper discusses my experience over the last several years as an instructor in offering an optional game-based learning or GBL component in an introductory Western art history course of 100 to 375 beginning art history students. Students in the course could elect to complete or play 2 computer games designed by the Triceum Company, Maecenas and Lumiere, as one of the course requirements. This essay also foregrounds my qualitative analysis of the response of students to gameplay within the disciplinary framework of art history. The Triceum games channel significant aspects of the student learning experience in that through various mechanisms, they deepen student interest and enhance students' skills of visual identification and analysis. For instance, the games strengthen students' retention of art and historical fact through spatial memory techniques. I will offer anecdotal evidence gathered in my GBL Enhanced Art History course that indicates certain aspects of learning have been realized in practice and that points to consistent undergraduate motivation and engagement with 2 art historical eras through gameplay. While I will describe basic scenarios of each game in this talk, I will focus more closely on the structure and key details of Lumiere, the more complex and popular of the 2 games. The traditional art history lecture and textbook strive to inculcate the essential art history skills of visual identification and careful visual analysis of important artworks. Conventional learning objectives in a traditional art history class include gaining the skills to be able to identify key objects, artworks, monuments, and buildings in Western and world cultures. Students are also asked to work toward using specialized art history terminology correctly in order to describe elements of artworks and architectural structures as well as aspects of the artistic process. Finally, students are asked to understand how the social, economic, theological, and other cultural contexts of a given artwork or architectural structure contributed to various meanings for the work during the time of its creation. These objectives are presented in course lectures as well as in the supporting textbook used in conjunction. Students' retention of material is reinforced with targeted quiz and exam questions. These assessments test students' ability to define and apply critical terminology appropriately and to identify crucial elements of a given artwork or monument as being connected to the work of certain canonical artists or architects in the Western tradition. Many of my students have found that the participatory first-person game narrative based in a historical time period central to Triceum's art history games to be more engaging as they work toward these same skills and as they learn about key historical and cultural developments. I believe one reason for this high level of commitment to the games is because at each gameplay level, the player repeatedly cycles through the game design's spatial clues and sites such that these, along with other information, become highly mnemonic and facilitate the retention of European historical names, dates, and places, even for those students who have little to no previous study of Western history. Each game has several levels. Maecenas has 4 levels of play and Lumiere 3 acts or levels, although it is the more time-consuming game to complete. The Maecenas and Lumiere games are both structured around a historical persona and first-person perspective. Gameplay thus involves players playing the role of this historical personage of the era. Economic or artistic competition is foregrounded in each game. Within the commerce and finances of a 15th century Medici-like prince in Maecenas, and who remains an invisible presence, or in Lumiere, in the art market interactions and exhibition organizing of the American impresario Horace Brown, who is the avatar of the game player. Horace inhabits and works within the 19th century Parisian studio gallery system. In these games or GBL versions of art history material, the visual skills of art history are prompted in social interactions or networking that the first-person player of the game experiences. Especially in the Maecenas Renaissance era game, the economic and political context of the era is made predominant through a series of trades and banking transactions that are to be completed by the first-person player. In Maecenas, the player does not have an avatar, nor do you interact with other specific characters. This game then takes on a static quality which some students indicated they preferred. But the game does not depict or move through specific buildings or sites in Florence or other city-states. The first-person player of Maecenas is presented with possible economic transactions with other partners like the city-state of Milan, or the Ottoman Empire, a Davisi family trader, or a church mining guild. You are prompted as the player to make decisions about trading with them. You as the player play the role of a Medici-style banker and must decide where to invest or divest and reckon with the political penalties that some business decisions carry with them. You try to stay out of bankruptcy while navigating the politics of Medici family business dealings with both their allies and competitors of the 15th century. For instance, the game reminds you that usury is condemned by the church in punishing you by taking away points earned when you decide to accept loans in order to make a larger profit, since, in the end, this hurts your social standing with the church and can risk your future transactions with them. In some transactions, you must deal with fallout from the Protestant Reformation or the historical invasion of the Holy Roman Empire. You are asked to decide which major artwork to commission, which will make or break the reputation and career of artists involved, such as Sandro Botticelli. For these commissions, you, the player, are presented in a commissioning mini-game with 3 images of artworks with brief descriptions. From these, you are to select the one most appropriate to the situation or the one that is most advantageous to your various alliances. This choice also requires that you are able to identify important Renaissance artworks that are covered in the class lectures. In contrast, with Horace Brown as her avatar, the player in Lumiere moves through various spaces that depict the cityscape of 19th century Paris. Horace, an American in Paris in the game, seeks to further his career as a gallerist and art activist in Paris. He ends up serving as a negotiator between the established old guard of the French Academy and the upstarts of the younger generation who were the artists of Impressionism. The old guard is represented in the game by the Academy painter Ernest Meissonier and the head of the Academy, the Comte de Neuerkerke. Characters Horace encounters at the Salon. The Salon's associated site is the Palace of Industry, where the official salons took place. The Impressionists in the game are represented by the artist characters Gustave Courbet, Edouard Manet, Berthe Morisot, Victorine Morand, Mary Cassatt, Claude Monet, and Edgar Degas. In a layer of stealth introduction to key figures of the era in French culture, Horace encounters Charles Baudelaire and Émile Zola as the game progresses, major art critics of the era, whom students then also register as important figures of the period. As a player progresses in the game, an element of feminist critique is revealed in Horace's exchanges with women painters, Cassatt and Morisot, about the difficulties they encounter in exhibiting their work in Paris and about their concerns for their own reputations in Parisian society if they were to serve as models. Regardless, Horace tries to convince Morisot, for instance, to pose for Manet. Later, in a hand during the Connections mini card game that I will explain shortly, students are presented with the image of the actual 1871 Manet portrait of Morisot, and some students make the connection to the earlier conversation and the feminist content of this painting. The Connections game also underscores for players that Morant, like Morisot, was an accomplished artist in her own right, in addition to serving as a model for Manet, for which she is much better known in traditional art history. Lumiere furthermore develops students' skills of visual analysis and identification through the drills presented in the mini-game Connections. Connections is a strategy card game that Horace/you are cued to play with another character as you progress into the later acts. It involves linking cards or artworks to each other on a playing surface in a number of categories, by period, by artist, or by genre, meaning landscape, portrait, still life, or history painting. You wager against your artist/opponents, Manet and Morant among others, about the accuracy of how you link artworks to each other through commonalities. This categorizing of artworks requires you to be able to identify them. All of the cards or artworks featured in Lumiere can even be looked up in a book-like codex located in a button in the game, but many players, like myself, do not realize this. The rounds of the Connections game demand visual knowledge of 19th century art, and many players, myself included, have to replay the card game repeatedly in order to advance to the next level. Because of the repetition it requires, Connections is a drill and mnemonic about identifying various motifs and styles in artworks and knowing differences and commonalities between what the French Academy valued and what the Impressionists put forward. While some students bristle at the repetition required, many say they honed visual skills in it, and as a result they scored higher on quizzes and exams in the course. The Lumiere game follows Horace as he tirelessly organizes numerous artists to protest against the Academy's policies and to stage a counter-exhibition for those rejected for the Salon. In the game, this alternative exhibition is staged in the commercial Durand Ruel Gallery, some distance from the Palace of Industry. In reality, the historical Impressionists displayed their artworks in another wing of the same building. After their public protests convinced Emperor Napoleon III to grant them a space there for an officially sanctioned Salon of the Refused. As the player learns later in the game, even the Impressionists show independence. For instance, the avatar Degas declines to sign Brown's protest petition because he states that he still supports the official salon and not a counter-exhibition to it. And to use the parlance of our time, the game is also about Horace as he networks in real time to cement his connections in Paris and to establish the artistic reputation of the upstart artists. Lumiere thus debunks for students the facile myth of artistic genius as a direct route to fame and fortune. Horace enacts a key context for art. He shows that even in the 19th century art world, the building of crucial artistic and business relationships was a foundation for advancement and success. And while in comparison, Lumiere's animated renderings of various art sites in the historical Parisian art world are almost cartoonish, lacking the detail of the actual places in question as we see in this side-by-side comparison of the Palace of Industry, they nevertheless function as visual anchors for Horace/the player's various encounters and conversations with the major figures of Impressionism. Arguably, the game then uses well-known spatial memory techniques such as the memory palace or memory journey as outlined by Francis Yates in The Art of Memory. Lumiere's Parisian spaces include the Gare Saint-Lazare train station, the Palace of Industry, home of the Academy and the Salon, Manet's studio, Monet's home and gardens at Giverny, and the interior of the Durand Ruel Gallery. Lumiere establishes a vaguely French atmosphere and another memory technique in the repeated music and other sounds which come up when one enters or exits a given game level or arrives at a particular site. For the train station, a French-style accordion riff is alternated with the sounds of French being spoken. In the salon and the gallery spaces, one hears muted conversation and footsteps on a wooden floor. During gameplay, players are also slyly introduced to specific neighborhoods in the city that were important to the Impressionists. Another stealth teaching moment can be found in the minigame Discourse, during which characters like the Academy painter Meissonier quiz Horace/you about current events, French history, and aspects of art, asking you to fill in the blanks of their questions correctly, or face their withering boredom and haughty insults regarding your lack of sophistication. These are thinly disguised French history lessons, and they are delivered without penalty, since players can repeat these mini-games and correct their answers in another round. Thus, Lumiere offers you/the player the opportunity to learn French history and art history quite painlessly within quasi-conversations or card games with major artists and critics of late 19th century Paris, which students say they enjoy almost despite themselves. Many students later realize that having to repeat these quizzes to progress through a level facilitates their retention of even the lecture material. I began by outlining the objectives of teaching the essential art history skills of visual identification and analysis in the beginning art history course, as well as of imparting knowledge of Western history. In my experience, students find the participatory first-person game narratives of the Triceum Company, based in a historical time period, to be more engaging than a textbook, as they work toward these goals of visual analysis and historical knowledge. The economic and cultural transactions completed by the first-person player within each game level of Maecenas and Lumiere incentivize students to become more attentive to visual detail and to the facts of history. Student feedback evidences that the modality of gameplay and the mechanics, incentives, and mnemonics of the Triceum art history games enable many students to become more confident in their visual and finally also art historical skills.